paying our respect and floral tribute before the bust of Mahatma Gandhi, the father of our nation and the incarnation of nonviolence. I would request His Excellency Minister of Culture of the Kingdom of Thailand to please come forward and pay the floral tribute, followed by Her Excellency Madam Executive Secretary of ESCAP, Madam Ambassador of India to the Kingdom of Thailand, Sir Ambassador Swaminathan, kindly come forward. Thank you. May I request His Excellency Minister of Culture, Executive Secretary, Madam Ambassador to kindly stand for the photograph.
Maybe sit like because go.
One more here.
Yeah.
No, and
Okay, that was all the
You can please.
against the photographs. Okay.
Please.
Please, Dr. Manu, please come. Yeah.
Ambassador from Sri Lanka, would you like to
May I request
for the
everyone to kindly move to CR Room 1, will escort team. And for those participating online, we'll be moving to the conference room 1 and we'll resume the event in 5 minutes from now. Please stay tuned. Thank you. Namaskar, Sawadee good morning. His Excellency Mr. Itipul Kunplom, Minister of Culture of the Kingdom of Thailand, Her Excellency Ms. Armida Salsia Alisjabana, Under Secretary General of the United Nations and Executive Secretary of ESCAP, Her Excellency Ms. Suchitra Durai, Ambassador of India to the Kingdom of Thailand and Permanent Representative of India to UNESCAP, and Ambassador R. Swaminathan, former Secretary to the Government of India. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Embassy of India in Bangkok and UNESCAP, I am delighted to welcome you all for the commemoration of this year's International Day of Nonviolence. This event is jointly organized by the Embassy of India in Bangkok and UNESCAP. On 15th of June 2007, the United Nations General Assembly decided to observe the International Day of Nonviolence each year on the 2nd of October, the birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi, who led the Indian independence struggle and inspired many more movements for civil rights and freedom across the world. We celebrate this important occasion every year at this UNCC to renew our resolve to continue to uphold the ideals and principles espoused by Mahatma Gandhi. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we begin this commemorative event with screening of a documentary video on Mahatma Gandhi's ideas and philosophy. These ideas and principles are as relevant today as always. May I request the Secretariat and our colleagues to play the video on the screen. Thank you.
In a world torn apart with strife, he walked a very different path. The journey and the destination were one and the same. The freedom he sought was inseparable from peace and non-violence. Deeply rooted in India's civilizational values, Gandhi channelized the timeless philosophy of peace for the realities of the contemporary world. Truth for him was both the means and the end. The desire for truth, satyagraha, was the cornerstone of Gandhian politics and philosophy. The truth for Gandhi was the threading together of the principle of Sarvodaya, holistic development for all, and Antyodaya, upliftment and dignity for the weakest. Armed with this inner truth, Gandhi created a mass mobilization unmatched by anything the world has ever seen. Picking up a handful of salt as an act of defiance, or creating the political metaphor of the charkha, the humble handloom, his symbols for India's freedom embodied not only the deep moral strength of peaceful resistance, but also the vision of sustainability of an economy with human dimensions. Nothing ever happens in isolation. With startling clarity, Gandhi saw how the crises of the modern world affect us all, and how the transition from conflict to cooperation needs a global response guided by a shared sense of humanity. His life was his message, walking together on the long road to peace and sustainability. Let us be the change we want in this world.
Suchitra Durai to kindly come up to the podium and deliver her remarks, please.
His Excellency, Mr. Itipol Kunplom, Minister of Culture of the Kingdom of Thailand, Ibu Armida Alice Jabana, Executive Secretary of ESCAP, ambassadorial colleagues, permanent representatives to ESCAP, members of the diplomatic corps who are all joining us online, representatives of the Indian diaspora community, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, namaskar, good morning, sawadee kha. As has already been mentioned earlier by my colleague, in 2007, the UN General Assembly adopted a consensus resolution to commemorate the birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi, which falls on the 2nd of October as the International Day of Nonviolence. Since then, of course, 14 years have passed, and every year, violence has increased and has taken on new forms. For instance, Gandhiji described poverty as the worst form of violence. Thus, the significance of the International Day of Nonviolence is not only to remind us about the life and the achievements of Gandhiji, but to reiterate his thoughts and ideas. For us in India, we are of course deeply grateful to Gandhiji, the father of the Indian nation, for having led a truly unique independence movement that delivered us from colonial rule in a non-violent manner. But Gandhian thoughts and beliefs are not just the legacy of India, but belong to the whole world. Gandhiji influenced many great leaders, most famously Martin Luther King of the US and Nelson Mandela of South Africa. Mahatma Gandhi was a multifaceted personality. His outward simplicity and his focused devotion to nonviolence enveloped layers of ideas, disciplines, and aspirations. He was a man of ideas, but above all, he was a man of action. He was an ordinary man who rose to extraordinary heights. His philosophy of nonviolence was, of course, again, nothing new. He took a very ancient Indian idea, that of ahimsa, or nonviolence, which forms the core of both the ancient religion of Jainism and Buddhism, and refashioned it to suit the specific context of his times. In his hands, ahimsa became an important political instrument. Ahimsa was not a passive state, a mere absence of violence. Gandhiji combined it with a sense of responsibility for the welfare of people. His great achievement was to demonstrate through his own example that nonviolence can be implemented effectively, not only in the political arena, but also in our daily life. The other value he upheld and by which he mobilized the entire Indian subcontinent was that of satyagraha, of truth, the power of truth or the soul force. Thirdly, he believed in the philosophy of Sarvodaya, the upliftment of all. From time to time, of course, questions have been raised on the relevance of his methods in today's fast-paced and globally interlinked world, where threats to peace, security, and social harmony abound. But the essential validity of Mahatma Gandhi's truth has not changed, because human nature itself has not changed. Much of what Gandhiji believed in was a harbinger of what became the underlying philosophy of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development adopted by the United Nations. An end to poverty and hunger, sustainable consumption and production to prevent the degradation of the planet, respect for human rights and human dignity, decent work for all, gender equality and women's empowerment, the importance of sanitation and public health. In the era of the COVID-19 pandemic, we can all see clearly how sanitation and health are very closely interlinked. Speaking of the pandemic, I recall that during an outbreak of plague in India in 1896, Gandhiji volunteered to be part of the Municipal Sanitation Committee in Gujarat. Gandhiji was a great advocate of volunteerism. Recently, at an event in the UN on Mahatma Gandhi, India's Prime Minister, Shri Narendra Modi, spoke about the importance of people's participation as advocated by Gandhiji. He recalled that everyone knows that he, that is Gandhiji, had brought change, but it would also be right to say that he had awakened the inner strength of people so that they could bring the change themselves. Unquote. In India, of course, now the Swachh Bharat mission or the Clean India campaign and the Digital India campaign are examples of people's participation. Another fallout of the COVID-19 pandemic has resulted in, as I recall seeing a very fine article on the ESCAP website recently, which indicates that there is a new legacy of inequality. More than 90 million people in the Asia-Pacific region have slid into poverty, and more than 140 million have lost their jobs. The widening gap between the rich and the poor is dangerous indeed for humanity. This is where Gandhiji's theory of trusteeship is now finding increased resonance. Let me quote Gandhiji's own words. Supposing I have come by a fair amount of wealth, either by way of legacy or by means of trade and industry, I must know that all that wealth does not belong to me. What belongs to me is the right to an honorable livelihood, no better than that enjoyed by millions of others. The rest of my wealth belongs to the community and must be used for the welfare of the community, unquote. He said this in June 1939. In fact, he wrote this in the publication called The Harijan. Before I close, I would like to thank His Excellency, the Minister, for accepting our invitation to grace this function, despite his very busy schedule. I look forward to his remarks. I would like to thank Executive Secretary Ibu Armida and her excellent team for having co-hosted this event. And of course, our guest speaker from India, eminent Gandhian Sri Rajiv Vora, for having agreed to share his valuable thoughts online with us. And to the senior officials of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Diplomatic Corps, and the representatives of the Indian community who have joined us both here physically and online, we greatly appreciate. I would like to thank the talented artists from Thailand and India for agreeing to render the bhajans or the devotional songs. Gandhiji, as some of you may know, had a very musical ear. I also thank the embassy team for their hard work. Khop khun kha. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Ambassador, for your kind remarks. Now I invite Her Excellency Ms. Armida Salciales Japana, Under Secretary General of the UN and Executive Secretary of ESCAP, to present the message of His Excellency Mr. Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations on the occasion, and her own remarks. Please.
His Excellency Mr. Itipol Kudom, Minister of Culture of the Kingdom of Thailand, Her Excellency Ms. Suchitra Durai, Ambassador of India to the Kingdom of Thailand and Permanent Representative to ESCAP, Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, good morning, Sawadika, and welcome to our annual observance of the International Day of Nonviolence. I have the honor and privilege to read out the message from the Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, on the occasion of the International Day of Nonviolence, before proceeding to my own remarks. And I quote, "It is no coincidence that we mark the International Day of Nonviolence on the birthday of Mahatma Gandhi. For Gandhi, nonviolence, peaceful protests, dignity and equality were more than words. They represented a guiding light for humanity, a map to a better future. They also provide a template to address today's troubled times. conflicts and climate change, poverty and inequalities, mistrust and divisions, all under the shadow of the COVID-19 pandemic, which continues to devastate people and economies alike. The solution to these challenges is in our hands: solidarity. We need to recognize, as Gandhi did, that what unites us is far greater than what divides us. That peace provides the only pathway to a better future for all. Addressing the challenges of our world means coming together as one human family and embracing peace like never before. We call on combatants around the world to lay down their arms and focus on defeating humanity's common enemy, COVID-19, not one another. We urgently need to deliver life-saving vaccines and treatment and support countries in the long road to recovery ahead. We need to intensify our work to reduce inequalities and end poverty. We need a bold global plan of action to heal our planet. Most of all, we need to renew trust in one another. Hatred, division, conflict, and mistrust have had their day. It is time to usher in a new era of peace, trust, and tolerance. On this International Day of Nonviolence, let us heed Gandhi's message of peace and get down to the business of building a better and more peaceful future for all. End quote. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, on this day, we recognize the enduring vision and wisdom of Mahatma Gandhi, pioneer of the philosophy and strategy of nonviolence. Nonviolence is the greatest force of the disposal of mankind, he once said. This clear message is directly relevant to Asia and the Pacific, for nonviolence must continue to underpin and shape our efforts to foster regional cooperation and build back better from disasters and crises. The COVID-19 pandemic, coupled with climate change crisis, has placed enormous pressures on the economies and societies of our region. Indeed, rising levels of extreme poverty, inequality, vulnerabilities, and environmental degradation all threaten to undo and even reverse progress on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Yet in the nonviolent resistance philosophy of Gandhi, our common challenges can be addressed by drawing on his principles and lessons, such as his commitment to promote dignity, inclusion and mutual understanding, equality and empowerment, social justice and protection, sustainable development. These principles remain universally relevant for everyone, everywhere. They also underpin the principles of the UN Charter and our pledge to leave no one behind. Gandhi showed the world that peace, respect, and equality are the most powerful forces for change. Let us be inspired to take action and bridge the have and have not divide as we strive to build a better future for all. In a world driven by conflicts and violence, Gandhi's message of nonviolence holds the key to an inclusive, resilient, and sustainable future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Executive Secretary, for your kind remarks. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to welcome our chief guest for the day, His Excellency Mr. Itipul Khunphlom, Minister of Culture of the Kingdom of Thailand. His Excellency has served as advisor to various ministers in the past, from 2008 to 2016. During this period, His Excellency also served as the mayor of Pattaya city. During 2018 to mid-2019, he served as the Vice Minister for the Office of the Prime Minister. His Excellency took over as the Minister of Culture of the Kingdom of Thailand in July 2019. He completed his Bachelor of Laws from the Chulalongkorn University and his Master of Laws from the Golden Gate University in the USA. May I request His Excellency to kindly deliver his remarks and share his thoughts on this important day. Thank you, Excellency.
Your Excellencies, it is Amida Sauce Alice Jabana, Executive Secretary of UN ESCAP. Her Excellencies, Ms. Suchita Turai, the Ambassador of India of the Kingdom of Thailand and her spouse, distinguished guests, the diplomatic corps, our friends from Thai Indian Chamber of Commerce, Thai India Associations, the Director of the Kanti Institute, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Royal Thai Government and Ministry of Culture, we were pleased to honor to be here and really delighted to join in commemorations of the International Day of the Non-Violence. As you know, peace is one of the things that all the people around the world that we request, and we spend our normal life in peace, harmonies, and prosperities. And especially for UN International Day of the Non-Violence that United Nations just adopted from 2007, that can confirm the message of peace from the people all around the world, especially in all the period of time. This year, also the commemoration of the International Day of Non-Violence is quite special for Thai people, and especially for the Indian people also. That is coincided with the 75th years of India independence and the 75th anniversary of the establishment of the diplomatic relations between the Kingdom of Thailand and Republic of India. Indian statesman Mahatma Gandhi is honored by our Thai people, and we very acknowledge and accept his philosophy. The great supporter for peace and non-violence. The meaning of peace, or Santi in Sanskrit, also in Thai, is a great meaning, and also according to the Hindu belief and also the Buddhist belief, means the conditions of the man that is calm and undisturbed by any destructive feeling, such as anger, revenge, greed. Non-violence is also the inadequate translations of the words ahimsa in Sanskrit. Mahatma Gandhi explains that ahimsa means love of mankind, compassion and tolerance, without which ahimsa cannot be attained. Ahimsa must be expressed in the heart, words, and deeds. Ahimsa is very hard to achieve. In Gandhi's own words, we may never be strong enough to be entirely non-violent in thought, words, and deed, but we must keep non-violence as our goal and make steady progress toward it. The truth of the few will count. The untruth of millions will vanish, even like chaff before a whiff of wind. In short, peace means more than a peace treaty, or non-violence means more than that chasing to use of violence. Peace or Santi and non-violence or ahimsa must originate from heart that is well controlled in generate calmness, love for all beings, compassion, tolerance, and forgiveness. Peace and non-violence must go hand in hand, being motivated by sincere love for mankind and through forgiveness. And on behalf of the Government of Kingdom of Thailand, the Ministry of Culture, we have a strong policy and we have a mission in operating in the culture, religions, and art of the nation and international levels. In the religious dimensions, the ministry nourished and promoted Buddhist and the other religious affairs and support to the development of knowledge and virtual understanding. Religious encourage to the people to follow in doctrine that respect and can bring the power of belief and faith in the operation of the religious affair as a crucial mission, including inter-religious relations with this cooperative, constructive, and positive interaction between people, individuals, and institutional levels. We put endeavor in creating reconciliations between people by carrying out various activities to drive the mission to achieve our objectives for people to adopt the philosophy of a sufficiency economy and maintain a peaceful and sustainable way of life onward. And today, with this socio-economic impact from the COVID-19, Mahatma Gandhi's message of peace and non-violence should continue to foster regional cooperation and sustainable development in Asia and the Pacific in order to create a peaceful world. A peaceful world, we must learn to practice non-violence with one another in our day-to-day interactions. Thank you very much. Namaskar. ขอบคุณครับ
Thank you, Your Excellency, for sharing your kind remarks and thoughts with us. We are deeply humbled and we thank you for blessing this occasion with your kind presence. Thank you. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we will now play a pre-recorded message of our guest speaker, Dr. Rajiv Vora. Dr. Vora, born in a Gandhian family of Saurashtra in Western India in 1947, has been part of the Gandhian movement for more than 5 decades. Writer, editor, and educator, he is a campaigner for rediscovering Gandhi's root text, Hind Swaraj. Dr. Vora is former editor of Gandhi Marg of the Gandhi Peace Foundation. He has guided international non-violent peacekeeping experiments, and he has been felicitated a couple of times for his writings. Being a keen student of classical music, he has written and lectured in India and abroad on Indian classical music, and he was invited as a consultant to the Rotterdam Music Conservatory. I request my colleagues to kindly play the message on the screen. Thank you.
Dear brothers and sisters, I feel honored to speak in this program in a beautiful country of a beautiful people with a very rich cultural heritage of our common civilizational roots. My very warm greetings to the diplomatic community of Bangkok, and with special thanks to Indian Ambassador Suchitra Durai and her colleagues for so graciously inviting me to talk to you. Why do we want to know and understand Gandhi? We want to understand Gandhi because we want to understand ourselves. We want to understand Gandhi because he was an iconic symbol of unity, of truth, non-violence, and reason that is universally innate to human being but elusive to modern man. Being human is being disposed to truth, nonviolence, and reason, the essence of being human. Our life, however, does not speak of our essence. Gandhi does. There is a huge split in our life between essence and existence, which reflects again in split, even in contradiction, between knowledge and life, thought, speech, and action, and principles and practice. Being human, our awareness of the split or the schizophrenic life speaks in many ways, in ways of man's perpetual struggle for transcending the split and achieving unity. For example, though we prefer to live a life based on gross and subtle injustice and total immorality, we do aspire to achieve all-round justice and moral life. Hence our attraction towards Gandhi, for in Gandhi there is no such schizophrenic split or gap, no adjusting of truth to time. Now let us see what he did in India and to the world. British Empire had become so very confident of enslaving the body, mind and soul of India, having brutally beaten them up thoroughly by 1900, that one of the reports from colonized India to the Secretary of the State in London would say, now they will never lift their head against us, they will never say no to us. In their assessment, Indian soul was so violently crushed that it was for them dead for good. Never did they realize that Indian soul resides in its civilizational spiritual ethos of self rather than in the physicality of the body. And thus, when a young Mohandas Gandhi, a lawyer who had gone to South Africa in 1893 to represent a business firm in a lawsuit, raised a non-violent civil disobedience as a weapon of soul against black law, racially discriminatory to Indians and passed by the white racist British government, the dead Indian rose to redeem their human dignity. Indians were called coolie, a demeaning term for laborer. What made Gandhi into a satyagrahi or a practitioner of civil disobedience, non-violent civil disobedience, for the first time was an incident on 7th June 1893 that proved to be the turning point of the history of colonized and the colonial rule, both. Young Gandhi was forcibly thrown out of the train at Pietermaritzburg station on that chilly night because he dared to occupy his seat in first-class compartment with a white man. Gandhi got up with a firm resolve to redeem the honor of the enslaved without hurting the honor of the adversary. Eventually, he caused the throwing out of the empire one by one from the colonies, satyagraha known and practiced world over ever since India won its freedom through collective application of the method of non-violence in public life, was born in South Africa on 11th September 1906 under the leadership of Mohandas Gandhi. The lawyer Gandhi, who was to return to India having finished this job, stayed back to lead non-violent civil disobedience, an epic struggle with untold voluntary self-suffering, sacrifice and valor, ended in 1914. The British confessed, you cannot catch Gandhi. You cannot enslave him because he is not a body. He is a pure soul. You cannot catch a soul. Mohandas Gandhi returned to India in 1915 to a great welcome, observed silence for a year while traveling the country with a keen observations. A nation razed to the ground rose to the pinnacle of moral strength of non-violence as sole force. A nation enslaved for 200 years won its freedom in 1947, 15th August. Freedom came however, with unbearable cost. Just an old man in loincloth in distant India, yet when he died, humanity wept, wrote Louis Fisher. The heaven and earth difference Mahatma Gandhi made from earlier resistance against the British rule was his radical reinterpretation of the meaning of freedom rooted in the Indian tradition of Swaraj or self-rule and non-violence as the mean for achieving it. He redefined the very meaning of freedom in civilizational terms in his seminal root text Hind Swaraj he wrote in 1909 as he unfurled his epic struggle. Freedom not merely as transfer of power from the British to the Indians, but in terms of freeing from the aggression of Western modernity, modern civilization, and for the recovery of Indian selfhood grounded in the genius of its people. Mohandas Gandhi clearly saw fundamental incompatibility of modern civilization with universal human values and human principles. Indian masses immediately saw their self-image in the redefined freedom struggle as recovery of selfhood. He universalized the scope of Indian movement by emphasizing the world historical character of Indian struggle as symbolic of the struggle of the oppressed and exploited against all oppressors and the exploiters. He fought for a better world order and not simply for a free India. Indian freedom movement thus was not national but universal and humane. Its universal character was rooted in his firm belief in the universal innate goodness of man. To Gandhi, nothing was acceptable which was not cosmologically and transcendentally grounded. His struggle, therefore, was at three levels. Firstly, it was self-purificatory at personal level. As he said, national struggle is for me my training ground for the liberation of my soul from the bondage of the flesh. Secondly, his struggle was against social and religious evils and bad practices of his own people. And thirdly, on the strength of the two, against the foreign colonial rule. Thus, for him, it was a spiritual act rather than a political, as we understand the term in a mundane sense. To this end, he made truth, non-violence, and reason in the same order his three yardsticks for the validation of thought, method, and practice. Knowing the problem of reason with secular rationality, he said, reason is like King of England, guided and controlled solely by his councils of minister, the senses. For the advocates of ultimate supremacy of faith over reason, he said, faith begins where reason ends, meaning reason must be exhausted, its limits must ever be expanded. Truth, non-violence, and reason as yardstick is his response to the world divided between reasonless God and which has produced terrorism, and godless reason that has caused ecological disaster and the exploitation of the weak by the powerful. Today, the horror of pandemic must make us accept the failure of the moral and intellectual heritage of the modern Western worldview. Let us question if modern secularity has delivered what it promised, namely freedom. It is most relevant today to ask a simple question: from what it made man free? It made man free from the responsibility of the consequences of his freedom. It made man free from the faith in what is essential in absolute term for man's meaningful and morally oriented life. That is transcendental grounding and his submission to the absolute source of power. It liberated man from the powers beyond him, from the power of truth that Gandhi called God. It liberated man from the idea of sacredness of creation and from the idea of man being only one of the infinite infinite multitude of the progeny of nature, and hence not a master and the owner of the gift from the divine, and that he is not independent of the law of nature, that he is not the hero of the universe which the Renaissance made him out to be. It liberated man from metaphysically grounded outlook towards creation and established him in an absolute materialistic outlook that Gandhi called demonic and satanic. Modern scientific temper carries this violent spirit into the progress of modern science and its self-propelling renegade, runaway modern technology. Modern man's hubris knows no limits. We are remembering Gandhi today at a time when the world has been under terror attack of coronavirus, a tiny virus, since more than a year. Gandhi would have said it is God's or nature's reprimand for the anti-nature life modern world has been madly pursuing in the name of civilization. Only Gandhi had the courage, and it is this moral intellectual courage that we need to learn from him. As Martin Luther King said, we can ignore him at our own peril. Pandemic punishment has forced us to accept ways of life that modernity rejected and vilified as unprogressive and backward. Those who still survive through the use and service of the closest to the exclusion of the farther. That is the Gandhi's definition of self-reliance and self-rule, remain more or less untouched by coronavirus. All those following imperial model of use and service of the farther to the exclusion of the closer were not only suspended and came to a complete grinding halt, but also became the hub and carrier of the death trap of COVID-19. People were forced to live a need-based life, realized its value and worth. The principle of segregation observed by traditional Indian society, which was vilified in spite of social, religious and legal rectifications of corruption in its practice, became the only savior. There are a number of such lessons we need to document. In simple words, the main lesson is this: ways of modern civilization as bad practices and ways of so-called backward societies as good practices. Nature releases a very tiny fraction of its power and the entire world is forced to go on its knees, stunned, terrified and motionless. It is to be seen if any shame is still left in the modern man, for man's freedom has never been so absolutely circumscribed all over the world. Finding a medicine is neither a solace nor a reason to celebrate man's victory over nature, for the multifaceted impact of the reprimand is only a reminder of the absolute power of nature over man. If we wish to make humanity fearless for the future and follow the ways of sustainability, every nation should make a new beginning by starting to write its own text of self-rule, self-reliance and selfhood, on the line of what Mahatma Gandhi wrote in 1909, the text for India, Hind Swaraj, and I am ready to help any nation. Or a non-violent social order, Gandhi has given sufficient clues. Let us be reborn in what great poet Rabindranath Tagore called the heaven of freedom. Freedom that is heavenly and holy and not unholy, where man holds no responsibility for the consequences of freedom he indulgently enjoys. I gratefully thank you all.
On behalf of the Indian Embassy, I thank Dr. Vora for his inspiring message. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, the final item in today's event is a short cultural program curated by Swami Vivekananda Cultural Center in Bangkok. The cultural program includes two patriotic songs gracefully sung by Mrs. Meenu Singh and Mr. S.P. Singh. Mrs. and Mr. Singh have been closely associated with our cultural center in Bangkok. The songs are followed by a beautiful musical rendition of one of the Mahatma's favorite bhajans, or the devotional song called Vaishnav Janto by Dr. Jyotsna Srikant and Mr. Sadaraj Solomon. The embassy thanks the artists for their efforts in putting up this cultural program. Can we please screen the program?
हमको है अभिमान देश का, हमको है अभिमान,
हमको है अभिमान देश का, हमको है अभिमान।
जिसके पाँव पखारे सागर, गंगा भरे सवारे गागर,
धानी रे रे सानी दबमा
मगरी गरे गरे गम पसा, शोभित जिस पर स्वर्ग बहे तो मगरी गरे गरे गम पसा, शोभित जिस पर स्वर्ग वही तो शीश मुकुट हिमवान देश का। हमको है अभिमान देश का, हमको है अभिमान,
हमको है अभिमान देश का, हमको है अभिमान। जिसके रज कण का कर चंदन जिसके रज कण का कर चंदन,
झुक झुक नभ धरता पद वंदन,
पासानी सपानी दफा बगपा,
कली कली का प्राण खोलता,
स्वर्ण रश्मि का गान देश का। हमको है अभिमान देश का, हमको है अभिमान। कोटि बाहु में शक्ति सीखी कोटि बाहु में शक्ति सीखी,
कोटि प्राण में भक्ति सीखी,
पासानी सपानी दफा बगपा,
कोटि कोटि कंठों में गुंजित,
मधुर मधुर जयगान देश का। हमको है अभिमान देश का, हमको है अभिमान। सूरज बदले चंदा बदले, बदले चाहे ध्रुव तारा,
सूरज बदले चंदा बदले, बदले चाहे ध्रुव तारा,
संकल्प हमारा। सूरज बदले चंदा बदले, बदले चाहे ध्रुव तारा।
उन्नत शीर्ष हिमालय जिसका,
वह झुकना क्या जाने।
जो शांगार रिपुदमन विजेता,
वह डरना क्या जाने।
वो डरना क्या जाने।
अब संभले वो शत्रु नराधम, जिसने है ललकारा। सूरज बदले चंदा बदले, बदले चाहे ध्रुव तारा।
देवासुर संग्राम जय जो,
महाबली जग त्राता।
रावण कंस असुर संहारक,
सत्य धर्म निर्माता।
सत्य धर्म निर्माता।
इस देश के हम सपूत हैं, साक्षी है जग सारा। सूरज बदले चंदा बदले, बदले चाहे ध्रुव तारा। सूरज बदले चंदा बदले, बदले चाहे ध्रुव तारा। और भारत की शान बदले, ये संकल्प हमारा। सूरज बदले चंदा बदले, बदले चाहे ध्रुव तारा।
Thank you.
distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the close of our program today. I take this opportunity to join my embassy and ESCAP to thank you all for gracing this event with your presence here at UNCC as well as on the virtual platform. We are really grateful to you all for your kind gesture. Please stay safe. Have a great day. Thank you all. Thank you.